She has led research teams in the European Union looking at smart grids. She's an attorney and graduate of the University of Maryland School of Law. They have a very excellent program in Homeland Security there, and she's also very focused on bulk power reliability standards and cybersecurity. So look forward to her focus, and she's going to be giving us some insight into cyber warfare implications, which are external threats. So Zhen, thank you for being here.
Thank you. As Dennis says, I'm a lawyer, but I really do like engineering. My dad said, don't be an engineer because it's boring. So now I'm back, and I said, well, I really like engineering. I'm just glad I didn't have to take physics or do any of those electrical engineering things. So I am interested in cyber warfare implications because at the Institute for Energy and Environment, we work on the electric grid and the policy and legal issues that come with it. The electric grid is one of the critical infrastructure sectors that has mandatory reliability standards, and that's how we got involved in looking at cyber warfare. There won't be any explosions, but I will say that the law has not caught on to something as dynamic as the information communication sector. While there are many types of cybersecurity events, much of my discussion is in the context of a coordinated cyber attack. To make some of the legal and policy analysis, I had to assume that there would be something that could be determined to be a cyber attack or a cyber warfare by sovereign state. And so we're looking at the worst case scenario. Okay, all right. So the electricity sector and the cybersecurity sector, they also have unique characteristics. And I will use the electricity sector as an example of the types of cyber warfare implications that exist. And in the current legal and regulatory environment, the protective measures taken by cybersecurity teams could create a liability. And in order to mitigate that kind of liability, it's important for the federal government to give us clear leadership, and in those situations, government-guided response to the private industry. And I think this is, I call it the missing two-sided coin. And in order to achieve this, to make this missing two-sided coin available in our current legal and regulatory structure, I believe that there's a three-pronged approach: responsibility and leadership, emergency powers, and international cooperation. We've already talked about how the electric sector is pretty important. If we don't have electricity, some things just don't work. And if we have a blackout, all the lighted areas that you see on the map will diminish. And it's also susceptible to viruses. And there's also reports of how foreign entities are copying and exporting large amounts of our critical infrastructure information without us ever knowing or detecting it. I'm having trouble with this little thing. Okay, so the unique difficulties with cybersecurity from a legal standpoint is that the events are they can be deployed remotely with a push of a button, and the effects are instantaneous. And so industry must react right away. And that is the current responsibility of private industry to make sure that their assets work. So it's difficult to attribute at that time the activity to a specific location or perpetrator. You have to keep the grid running, and so you have to take whatever measures that you had planned previously at that moment. There's also no geographic or political boundaries to the internet. The whole point of the internet is to connect everyone and share information. And so the law hasn't really caught up with that. So this is where we have the problem. The industry must respond quickly, and in contrast, the law has a bunch of requirements that doesn't allow industry to look at those things right away. So if there was an attack and the perpetrator comes from a government from outside the US, or it's a terrorist, And it would be unwise to have the private industry take whatever action it could without considering the international law implications or the diplomatic implications. We don't want any sort of activity by private industry to be considered a hostile act by the U.S. itself. As I said, there are reliability standards for the electric grid. If these standards are not followed or found to be deficient, the industry faces steep fines, and the maximum right now is $1 million per day. And you can see that there are 8 specific standards, but they are more geared towards day-to-day operations, and they don't speak to the worst-case scenario, and that's what we're talking about here. And there is already some confusion about what a cyber asset is. The industry is working on that and looking to address it, and NERC is working with them, the North American Reliability Corporation. Okay, so the current laws do not promote easy sharing of information or give industry ability to act on its own. This is a country with a long history of protecting private rights. So in the Electronic Communication Protection Act, you can't just get information about someone's internet activities. And then this country has a history of protecting private property. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act prohibits intentionally causing excess damage in excess of $5,000. So there are a lot of liabilities that come with being a utility and having to provide a public good. And I think the law needs to be more supportive of the important role that utilities play in our daily life. So the cyber warfare implications, I didn't get to the international laws. Yeah, so there's the UN Charter that governs warfare. The idea of self-defense is that you're not allowed to take self-defense measures unless you have attribution. And as I said before, attribution is one of the biggest problems of cybersecurity. And there are passive defenses and active defenses. Passive defenses are just firewalls and passwords. And then active defenses is something that would create the immediate consequence. And for example, there are programs available on the market today where they can send some sort of virus back to the originating source. Okay, so these are the implications where the struggle between providing that stable, critical infrastructure and the legal implications of those actions that haven't really been explored. And that's why I think leadership and government-guided response is so important. And the 3 parts of that, of my suggestion is responsibility, leadership, emergency powers, and international cooperation. In responsibility and leadership, there is a shifting role. Because before an attack, the industry is the first line of defense, just like Michael said. And there has to be an inclusive assessment of the entire sector before applying cybersecurity measures. The tendency now is to push the threat away from the individual company or the individual utility, but really it should be a holistic approach, and the measures implemented should look at the impact on the overall security of the sector. And so post-attack is where we get into this gray area where there's lots of different events that might be considered an attack, but not really. And then there are other events which may culminate to something that could be determined to be from a sovereign state, but we don't really know. And at that point, the utility still has to respond and make sure that all of its assets are working. So this is where the government needs to step in and give industry clear steps, clear guidance as to what should happen because the government has the resources to look at the legal ramifications. The government has the resources to look at the security, the national level security of the sector. And how would the government do this? So they would do it by emergency powers. And one example of this is the electricity sector. Right now, there are proposed legislation that give FERC, the Federal Electric Regulatory Commission, emergency powers to issue directives and orders during emergencies. And with this power, it has to come with supporting mandates. And that includes consultation with the industry, protecting the information that comes up during this emergency situation, and cost recovery for the utilities and the companies when they take these measures. And the last component of my proposal is international cooperation. This is a global society, it's a global economy, and information technology does not have boundaries. And we need we need cooperation with other countries in order to find and prosecute the perpetrators. We also need legal assistance agreements, including extradition, investigation, and prosecution. We already have quite a few legal assistance treaties with many different countries. And there's also a convention on cybercrime by the European Council. But it's so new, we're not really sure if it works yet. And so even though we're not sure it works, it's important to take into consideration as a domestic issue that there will be viruses or events or different individuals that are in other countries looking to infiltrate just through information technology. And so in response to this two-sided missing coin, I think that we need clear government leadership and guided response to industry. And I suggest 3 things that should happen in order for us to replace that missing coin. And that's responsibility, leadership, emergency powers, and international cooperation. Thank you.